Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and folks will probably continue to come in, because I know it's a little confusing with leaving from a main room coming into a breakout room. But I just want to say again, thank you to everyone, and thank you for joining this breakout session, Taking Action Through Writing. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Please note that this session will be recorded. That way you can refer back to it later, and we'll make sure that the coalition, they're going to post everything and make sure that you also have this PowerPoint presentation as well as some additional resources that you can utilize coming down the road as well. Also, if you have any questions, try to type them into the chat, and I'll try my best with the time we have to try to answer a couple of those questions, and those questions that I can't get to, we will make sure that we do a Q&A that will be included with our materials that we'll give out at the very end, or at least have the links so that you'll have access to those materials. Let me start off by saying that my name is Kenya Campbell, and I'm the Secretary Treasurer for AFT-Maryland. AFT-Maryland is an affiliate of the American Federation of Teachers. We are a union of professionals. We're made up of public employees, healthcare workers, we have teachers, professional, paraprofessionals, other school-related personnel, as well as higher ed faculty. My other teammates could not be with us this evening, so I'm facilitating the session with hopes that you're able to walk away with some useful writing tools that you can use now through the 2021 legislative session to advance our huge lift of overriding the Blueprint Veto. Next slide. So you'll see here my other two teammates, Denise Riley and Ray Baker, they're not here, but they're with me in spirit, okay? They couldn't be with us. Next slide. So many people ask, why should I get involved? We can no longer sit back and hope for change. We have to take action when we're not satisfied. And what's going on today in our communities and what we're seeing nationally, we all know that we have to have our voices heard. It's an opportunity to offer your opinion and advocate for yourselves as well as others. It is our goal with this work of the Blueprint Override to not only be heard, but also to encourage others to listen to us. Your voice offers an understanding and awareness of issues that's faced by others. And there are three examples of writing that we could have our voices heard that I'd like to share with you all today. Next slide, Matthew. So the first example that I want to share with the group is written testimony. Okay, please note that I just want to make sure I put this out here before we go through this slide. There's an uncertainty at this point of what the upcoming legislative session will look like due to the pandemic. We don't know what that structure will be, and more than likely it may be virtual because of where the direction that we're going in. But it's important that we all stay informed, and we are keeping up with the process and the procedures that may change with how we're going to write testimony or how we may be giving testimony in person or virtually. And that there may be some sort of modifications that may come up to accommodate a virtual participation. So I just ask that everyone, keep informed and make sure you're paying attention to what the updates are that the Blueprint Coalition is putting out there, as well as its partners like AFT-Maryland, MSEA, and other affiliates with the Blueprint Coalition. We are looking out to see what this session is going to bring, and we want to make sure that you're prepared and ready to go once we get that information. So again, keep a lookout on those things that's happening. But a couple helpful tips around written testimony during the legislative session or for the General Assembly are, number one, you should know your bill or the legislation that actually you're looking into. You should know the title, you should know the number, the committee, and more importantly, who's the chair of that committee, who sits on that committee. One of the other things to include in your written testimony is clearly stating whether you support or you oppose the bill. This is very important. Sometimes I've seen where folks are actually writing their testimony and there's a question, are you in support or are you opposing this legislation? So it's very, very important to make sure that you state that up front. One of the key to most testimonies are including personal stories and how the particular legislation affects you or others. So, for example, adding real life experiences could possibly be a swing of the pendulum in another direction for some legislators. Ultimately, legislation is decided by those who speak and show up. So it's very important that we do that. And lastly, keep your testimony short and to the point. There's no need for any type of elaboration or anything being elaborate about your testimony. Get to the point, get your message in, and get back out. Okay? Next slide. Let's take a quick look at an example of testimony that was written here. This is an example of SB 100, HB 1300 for the Blueprint Coalition. And this is actual testimony that someone actually wrote out of our organization. But as you can see here, I just want to flag for you that you see that there's a greeting here addressing the chair as well as the committee members. Okay? There's also the position stated in the first line, that this is favorable. This person wants to support SB 1000. Okay? As you can see, it's very short. The second paragraph, as well as the third paragraph, goes on to explain the reasons why you actually either support or oppose this bill. So this is just a quick snapshot of what it could look like. Okay? Next slide. So another useful tool are op-eds. Okay? And I know that with our legislative session, typically our testimony is where we actually have our voices heard. But the op-ed is also an option that we could utilize during the legislative session as well as up into the legislative session and afterwards. This is really a form of writing. It's a writing that typically takes the opposition position of an editorial of a newspaper. Okay? And when you're composing an op-ed, it's sometimes useful to include someone that has expertise or namesake around the subject, okay, or expertise in the subject. And it's also good to sometimes collaborate with those persons as well. For example, a couple folks that come to my mind are John Willems, as well as Morgan Showalter, who was a commissioner. And I also think of Britt Kerwin. Those are huge names and good names to actually either collaborate with them or to actually have those folks to write op-eds or include them in what you're writing. Their experience and their titles of these individuals gives a whole lot of weight to your op-ed. So that you don't necessarily have to have that, but that's a good way to actually get your op-ed read and get some traction around it. Your goal in writing an op-ed is to move the public or the readers to your side of the issue. Media can be very useful or useful outlet to gain public attention. And this is important when we want to mount a case for overturning the veto or the Blueprint Veto and have it appear in the newspaper. This could either persuade people or have folks to pay attention to what you're doing so they can take action on helping to overturn the Blueprint Veto. So these are just some examples of an op-ed. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Next slide. Here are two examples of op-eds. And I will say that we will have additional examples that will be provided for you as well that you can actually use as examples to actually begin to write op-eds. So I just wanted you to take a look at this. The first one, as you can see, there's our friend, Britt Kerwin. And you see the title here, The Price of Improving Maryland Schools is Worth It. Catchy title. Britt's face is there. You also see some other familiar faces as supporters in the back as well as legislators. Then you see there's a piece over in the afro on the right-hand side. Our city schools are suffering. This is a call to action, okay? This one was actually written by Brandon Scott. Another example of an op-ed, okay? Next slide. The final writing action that you also can utilize are letters to the editor, okay? Also known as LTEs. You know, they're acronyms, especially in the teaching profession, around different statements and in a shorter way to say it. But LTEs basically are, there's minimal data that's included, but instead you're using emotional ploys or anecdotes, okay? Parents, students, and educational professionals typically are those that can move readers. Why? Because of their experiences, because of the stories, because of the emotions, because of things that have happened to them directly or folks that are connected to them. Okay? For example, a parent's involvement in their child's education outside of the classroom and at the legislative level. Parents come in, legislators will listen. Okay? We have advocates from different organizations like Leslie come in talking about special ed issues. Folks will listen because those are typically topics that some of our legislators are not familiar with, and that's an opportunity for voices to be heard around real life stories or situations. Okay? When writing LTEs, it is important to keep in mind diversity. So thinking about how diverse the state of Maryland is, you should encourage your audience to think about anecdotes that are true for rural Western Maryland as they are for urban cities like Baltimore or Prince George's County. Okay, so just take 1 second, half a second, to think about some of the experiences as it relates to you or someone connected to you around the Blueprint legislation. And I know many of you that are on this Zoom tonight, you've actually been linked in, you've been a stakeholder to the work that we've done with the Blueprint. So just think about some of the examples or stories or things that have come up that you can put inside of one of these letters to the editor to get folks to actually appeal to what you're attempting to do. Okay? Next slide, Matthew. Here's a couple more examples. You see the Baltimore Times here, where this is a letter to the editor. Again, it is the opposite. I'm sorry, this is, I'm thinking of Op-Eds. This is one that was written by Karen Brown, which was a letter to the editor in reference to the Kerwin Commission. Okay? There's another example here of how lawmakers can strengthen schools. And again, there will be additional examples that you can use also as a way of actually creating your own letters to the editor. Okay. Next slide. That was really quick with the time that we have, but I hope that you were able to move away or actually walk away, or actually you want to virtually move back to the main group, that you were able to take away a couple ideas from this and use them to move forward to take action on overriding the Blueprint. So I'll take a look. I'll see if we have a couple seconds, if we have any questions in here. And Matthew will put the link in the chat for everyone to actually transition back to the main room. Okay, Jessica. Okay. Someone had a question in here, which is a good question, about which publications should we focus our efforts on. And when you're looking at your op-eds, when you're looking at your LTEs, I would say that, again, it goes back to that diversity, okay? And you want to make sure that you get your publications posted in areas that you know that there are a large number of readers that will appeal to what you're saying. And you know that you can persuade folks. So typically we look at the Baltimore Times. I mean, the New York Times is a major paper. We actually look at the Baltimore Sun. Even with this controversies, we still use the Baltimore Sun. You have the Washington Post, but usually those major publications or those major news outlets are great places to try to do your letters to the editors as well as your op-eds. And I think that's it. I don't have any more questions. And I got a reminder here from Todd Reynolds. Hello, Todd. Smaller newspapers are also good places too. So I'm thinking of places like the Baltimore Brew. It's a smaller newspaper, but they do pick up great stories around education. So it would be actually helpful to utilize any way that you can get your message out there to folks. Matthew has also put the link. Someone, thank you, Lisa. Lisa put Maryland Matters, the 7th state. And if there are any more, Frederick News Post. That's another one, especially if you live and you have connections in the Frederick area. Bethesda Beat. Lisa, you have a huge number of different examples. Thank you for all of that. Thank you, Mary Jane. The Howard County Times and the Columbia Flyer. Capital Gazette. Thank you, Allison. Great examples. Matthew, if you check the chat, Matthew has put a link in there for you guys to move back to the main room, but I want to say thank you so much for allowing me to take your time this evening to share with you a couple tips and ideas of what you can do to take action. And I just leave you with this: never estimate the power of the pen. And in this point, a typewriter or a computer. So let's get writing. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.